Welcome everyone to this edition of your Freedom Hub's Free Market Cash Patient webinar series. I'm your host, Jeff Kanter, along with my co-host, Charles Froman. And we've got another exciting guest tonight. I think you're going to find some pretty national ramifications of what's going on here that we're going to discuss. And also bear in mind that these are recorded. So this is the standard link. We send a unique one each week, but if you're just seeing this for the first time, you can register here and get a reminder every week about these. And then we post every weekend. So come Monday morning, we'll be on all three of these key channels with this particular video, as well as the history of the ones we've had in the past. And to give you a little take a peek, this is the one that we ran last week as an example. And here's a whole slew of them that go all the way back quite some time. You'll see some great ones. And interestingly, this particular one here was banned by YouTube. So that's a rather interesting distinction, both on Brighteon and BitChute. It still persists, but YouTube has decided to take it down. So that's a rather unique twist on what they feel that you and I are allowed to see and make decisions about. And we do have an excellent couple of sponsors we're going to touch base on, and then we're going to really dig into what's going on with the guests tonight in the app we've got tied to that. But this is the bioactive hemp. This is the only bioactive product we've found out there. So we've been really vetting stuff, and this is really fantastic. They got a couple of key products, and if you go to their particular website, they're going to give you a special pricing on it, which is really a nice little gift to all of us. And normally you get 5% or whatever. They're going to give you 15% off. So it is quite good. So let's talk for a quick minute now about who we've got on for us tonight. So I'm going to let Charles take over here and do a little bit of an intro.
Sure, Jeff, and welcome, Cristin. Dr. Dickerson is well known in the health innovation field for her imaging centers, Green Imaging, with over 1,000 centers nationwide in all but one state. And that is such an important thing because if you're in the hospital facing a pretty serious sickness, the doctor's going to order some imaging, some MRIs, CAT scans, etc., x-rays, and the hospital bill is going to eat up all your out-of-pocket deductible on your insurance plan, several $1,000s. Well, now people are discovering if they go outside the hospital to a standalone imaging center, they can pay hundreds of dollars for these same tests and save a lot of money and oftentimes get better quality care as the centers bend over backwards to compete to serve your needs. And we heard about Cristin when Jeff and I, as the Forbes featured cash patient makers, got connected to Dr. Arshad's cash appointments app. And in that app, as we might demo later, are all of Dr. Dickerson's Green Imaging centers nationwide. So we'll show you how to shop for one of her imaging services near you. She is a radiologist at the Radiology Group of Houston. And Jeff, that is our intro.
All right, very good. Well, that sounds like it's going to be exciting. So I'm going to give Cristin control of the screen. I have stopped sharing, and now you should be able to take it back again. There you go.
There we go. Okay, well, this slide deck is a little bit, we work a lot with employers. Our roots are with self-pay patients, and for 9 years, we have been a resource for self-pay patients to get affordable medical imaging. I saw the need when I was a, practicing radiologist. People would come, ask me, why do I have to pay $1,500, $3,000 for this MRI? I can't afford it. They had these rising deductibles, or they had no insurance. We had 21% uninsured at that time in Houston. And so I decided to open an imaging center. I was going to be able to, take care of these patients. Well, that was going to be $3-4 million. And so as I looked around, I realized the imaging centers I was reading for were at half capacity. And Travelocity was emerging in the market at that point in time. So I got the idea to buy the unused capacity at imaging centers across Texas, across Houston and across Texas, and to just buy the scan from them. And we can do that legally. There's a Stark exemption. The Stark laws are what limit self-referral, but radiologists are allowed to have per-click leases legally. And so we were able to buy the scan from these imaging centers that actually needed, they needed that extra money. But we bought it at a discount. We added in our interpretation, and we offered really affordable self-pay rates across Houston and then throughout the state of Texas. And we were able to do that, for about 6-7 years, but I had been a self-funded employer. I had been an employer who, you may think that if your employer hands you a Blue Cross Blue Shield card, that is insurance that is paid for through Blue Cross Blue Shield, but that's not true. That's really the company credit card a lot of times. If you're a mid or larger size company, even many small companies, they're actually footing the bill. They're just using Blue Cross Blue Shield as their network. And so we had 300 covered lives in our health plan, and we incentivized our employees to use our own services and those of some strategic partners, keep that out of the Blue Cross Blue Shield plan, so it never showed up and never made the premiums increase. And so we were successfully able to do that. So I always saw the ability I always had the idea that we could be a preferred imaging network for employers, and that has happened over the last 3 years. But we have never lost sight of the self-pay, cash pay patient, because that's really where our roots are. What is diagnostic imaging? X-ray, ultrasound, CT, MRI, nuclear medicine, mammography. Those are all things that we do. There are companies that do what we do, and they only offer the big ticket stuff. With employers, we feel it's very important for people and with self-pay patients to use us in a low stress situation. I won't say that a mammogram is always low stress, but use us for a chest x-ray that you need for travel. And then you're much more likely to use us in a stressful healthcare situation. So we do offer all imaging modalities. There's some things that should only be done in a hospital, like cardiac MRI, because it requires a physicist on site. We don't do everything, but we do 99.9% of the imaging that can be done in outpatient centers. Some markets are difficult too, and we'll talk about that later. During COVID, what happens without diagnostic radiology? This is a really hot topic. During March and April, we dropped to about 50% capacity at imaging centers across the country. We're back up to about 80% because there's some rebounds, some cancer patients who didn't get their surveillance exams, high risk people who need their mammography now. But we're still not at capacity. And I've seen some statistics that imply that cancer patients are not getting the surveillance they need. Women are not getting their mammograms, even if they're high risk. And we're going to, and other, screening exams that really need to be performed. So there are lots, and we'll talk about this a little further, but there are lots of safeguards that are being put in place. Number one, these outpatient imaging centers are screening very carefully. You're going to have to bring in your within 24-hour COVID test if you've been exposed or if you have symptoms. They're not, anybody who has symptoms of COVID is not being allowed into these centers, because we have to make this a safe place for people who need essential imaging outside of a hospital. There are many large chains of imaging centers that have designated one of their centers for COVID symptomatic or COVID exposed patients. And there are hospitals who have done that as well. And that's where those patients really need to be seen. One thing, the first question is, does this need to be done right now? And so you have to look at, okay, my odds in my community of contracting. Now in Houston, we're, in a crisis right now. At least 1 in 100, maybe 1.5 in 100 people have COVID right now. That's significant. And so I have to weigh my breast cancer risk very carefully in deciding whether to get my mammogram right now or wait a few weeks and see if we can, get this calmed down. But if I had a new lump in my breast, I would certainly need to go get that handled immediately. So the first thing is, what is the risk versus benefit of the imaging exam you need? If it's non-essential, if it's fatty, you have some abnormal LFTs and your doctor thinks you have a fatty liver, let's wait a few weeks to do that. We're not giving medical advice. My concierge don't give medical advice, but they do tell you, they are informing patients about, okay, this is what, these are the precautions this imaging center takes. And, getting them a comfort zone. Many imaging centers are actually having patients, no additional people come with the patient to the appointment. The patient waits in the car until they receive a text. That's kind of tough in Texas in the summer. I got to find a shady spot, but you wait in the car, and then, when it's time for you to come in, you come in, you have your temperature taken, and, you go in by yourself to an empty waiting room and an empty room with the technician and have the exam. So they're really tremendous precautions that are being taken right now. But the economic strain of all this is huge. Given that before COVID, 40% of people did not have $400 to spend on a medical emergency, and 60% did not have $1,000. Yet the average deductible is $1,400 in this country. That is an economic, that was an economic crisis already, looking toward healthcare, and it is certainly going to be magnified by this. And so people becoming good stewards of their cash and healthcare is going to be really important. And employers as well. Employers are struggling, and nobody knows, they're talking about, astronomically, up to 20% increases in premiums next year for high deductible healthcare plans. That's not, we keep saying this is not sustainable, but that really may not be sustainable. And we're finding that. Green Imaging actually doubled its book of business for employer plans over the last 3 months. So we have, another 100,000 lives that we're taking care of, because these employers are very concerned about what's going to happen next year. Alternative sites of care, are great for employee. Number one, you can just drive up to most of these imaging centers. You don't have to go to the med center, pay $20 for parking, go find the 4th floor, check in. A lot of these are just drive up, you run in and get your care. They're also safer right now, and they're more affordable given our contracts. So we're enhancing individuals' access to services. We're providing lower cost services. We have a great patient experience, and I think you'll see that later with our Google reviews. We probably get 8 reviews a day, and they call our concierge out by name, which means they're getting a great experience. Our whole goal is we've had 2 reviews that said this was my best healthcare experience ever. Our goal is to be everybody's best healthcare experience ever. We provide tools to steer members to lower cost sites. One of the real problems, we built an app a couple of years ago so patients could just schedule themselves. The problem with that is 40% of doctors' orders are incorrect or incomplete. And people don't always, understand some of the Latin symbols that are on those orders, and people were scheduling themselves for the wrong exam. So, we don't allow people to completely schedule themselves. They can certainly reserve, get all their information to us and reserve a time. But we do have to make sure that order is accurate. We are completely radiologist owned and managed. And so our radiologists are protocoling those exams, making sure it's the right exam for you. And then, the data down the line, where we are collecting information from patients about their experience, not only, how was their customer service experience at the center, but also what did their doctor think about the exam and the report. And so we're collecting all that data and feeding it back in to make ourselves and our network better and better. One of the, really important things is having a safe workplace right now. Our radiologists, I swear I probably spend 2 hours out of my day right now assessing a story of this patient was exposed and then had a negative test, then had these stories ramble on, and people have become negative and then positive again and then negative again. And so we're really spending a lot of our time helping our patients, helping our imaging centers make good choices about which patients they take, and helping our patients, find the right imaging center for what they need. Our average pricing is about 70% less than hospital-based centers, and it's about 70% less than the average paid in a self-funded healthcare plan. We were asked by a large employer recently who already had cost containment in place. They already were steering employees to, the employees had a lower copay if they went to a non-hospital based imaging center. And we were still able to beat their pricing by about 40%. We also did some analytics against a reference-based pricing healthcare plan. One of the things that employers are doing is they're putting in place what's called reference-based pricing. It's usually, the reference is always Medicare, so I don't know why we don't just call it Medicare-based, but it's a multiplier of Medicare, and that is what they pay providers. And if the providers don't like it, they end up really negotiating it, but that's their goal, is to pay that percentage of Medicare. It doesn't work well for us because, we recognize that, there are marketplaces, there are free markets. And Boston, where 90% of the imaging is performed in hospital systems, is a very different market than Houston, where we've been driving down the cost of care for 9 years. And so our pricing varies dramatically between those two markets. And so, but when we do the analytics on claims data between those two markets, we're still, either place, we're still about, our price is about 30%, or their savings of about 70%, as compared to the average claim in a self-funded healthcare plan. With reference-based pricing, we were able to, the company that we analyzed had great savings in place. We still beat them. Our savings were still better, but they had about 50% of their claims from this last year were still unsettled. So they have a lot of noise. They're working really hard to negotiate with those providers, and there's no reason for them to. We've already done that. We've already negotiated that. This is a Central Florida school district, and this is kind of our cool thing that we're bragging about right now. This school district in Florida has 100% of the students are economically disadvantaged. So it is one of the poorest school districts in Florida. We had 10,000 covered lives, and what was happening is the employees couldn't afford the traditional healthcare plan. They were either going without it, or after they paid their premium, they didn't have money to pay for the care. And so the teachers union in Florida got involved and started putting pressure on the school district. And ultimately, the school district's foundation is giving them primary care at a near-site clinic. Before, their near-site clinic was a hospital, which makes absolutely no sense, because all the care throughout that episode of care is in the hospital system, which is going to be 3 times more expensive. So instead, they've put it with the Rosen Health Center. Harris Rosen started his own health center for his employees and was able to capture about 50% savings, and then gave that back to the community. So there are great stories out there, but he got involved, and his near-site, he's serving as the near-site clinic. His Rosen Health Center is serving as the near-site clinic for this school district. And then they gave, so there was a 0 out-of-pocket to use that clinic, and then 0 out-of-pocket for imaging, for green imaging. And so we were able to, this was just our estimate at this point in time. And then we figured that at about 50% engagement, we would get to about $2 million. We started with them in really December. We had a couple of patients in November, got ramped up to probably 30% utilization in January and February, and then COVID hit. But even so, we've been able to save the school district to date $627,000. And so, that's just, it feels really good. And our company mission right now is to continue to get, we want to hit that. We will easily hit, I think, 1.5 million this year, despite the downturn. But this is really, our goal by end of year is to try to get that 2 million back to the school district and to the employees. And so on CT and MRI alone, we saved them almost $250,000. This was a self-funded employer who had with this 100,000 Blue Cross Blue Shield claims across the country. And so once again, it's a very similar type savings profile. Steerage, the education process, whether you're a self-pay patient or your employer's, is incentivizing you to use green imaging. Steerage is very important. We send out an employee-facing newsletter that certainly can be self-pay patient-facing as well. And, one of the things that we're really emphasizing to our self-pay patients is, if you're on a high deductible healthcare plan and you haven't met your deductible, you're a self-pay patient. If you're in that situation, go to your employer and say, hey, you can do this. You can save $600,000 and give me this imaging at zero out of pocket. And we're all better off for that. We can get raises out of that. We can improve our healthcare plan out of that. So, some of our best advocates are our self-pay patients who go to their employer. And the patient education process is very important. And, we even down to, how do you use our app and how do you, initiate care with us? With the WOW app, it varies a little bit because we have some integration with them that's different. But typically, if you're a self-pay patient and you just want to have an exam, you can actually just snap a snapshot of your order and text it to our main number, and HIPAA compliantly, it will come across into our messaging app, and we will initiate the process. And this is an example of within an hour, this patient has a voucher and is ready to go and ready to be seen at the imaging center. Employee experience is just so important to us. It is, we do want to be everybody's best medical experience. And so I think I don't just want to be a good radiologist and get you a good report that your doctor and get you a CD in your hand that you take to your doctor. I want you to feel like you were cared for with our company. And I think that shows in our interactions. We're typically, I think we're back up to 4.9. Occasionally we got somebody who gave no reason, but gave us 1 star. And I'm not sure she understood the system because she never replied to us. But occasionally we'll get something like that, or we'll get, where somebody complains that the imaging, there was a 2-hour wait at the imaging center. Well, we don't have direct control over that, but certainly we give feedback to the imaging center. And, if that's repetitive, we eliminate that center from our network. But we like to stay about 5 stars. And then we get more, reviews. You're more likely to get negative reviews than positive, but we get more reviews, well above the industry average. And like I said, the customers call out our individual concierge. Leo's very personable. I see Leo's name in these about 3 times a day. How do we assess quality in the imaging centers? And that's, our model in Texas was that we read the studies. We have board certified and fellowship trained radiologists, and we all trained. I have a couple of people now who are new to our company who did not train at MD Anderson, but our core group all trained at MD Anderson. And, we've all worked in the Texas Medical Center for our careers. And by looking at the studies and making sure that we're reading them and the right subspecialist reads them and that the report is good, we do peer review internally, that's how the best way to assure quality. And ACR accreditation, yeah, that's great, but it's a single point in time in 3 years. And many people get a consultant in to come make sure their images look great. That's not the day-to-day experience at an imaging center. And we're in there, getting our hands dirty, boots on the ground, seeing what these images look like. If we don't read the study, there's some geographies where the radiologist may have an exclusive agreement, or it may be radiologist owned, and that's how the radiologist gets paid, is by reading the study. In that setting, we have peer review access to the images and reports as radiologists, and that enables us to go in there if there's ever a question about quality and make sure that, that's a good study. This is really relevant more to our employer space, but we can be bolted on if somebody has a traditional healthcare plan, like the school district had a traditional insurance company as its TPA and network. We were bolted on as a preferred imaging plan, just like you would bolt on vision or dental as another plan. And so, those employees are incentivized to use us and not stay within that traditional plan where they have this. I think their deductible is $1,400. Then they have a 70 to 75% coinsurance up to $6,000. So, that's just not affordable. For a $2,000 CT, which was the average in that plan, they're fitting the bill for $1,700 of that. And that, on a school district salary, that's just not viable. That's a horrible economic hardship. We don't, there are some, companies that have lived in the workman's comp space largely that have national networks, but they pay the providers really poorly. In fact, they do a same day discount. You have two studies, they pay the second one at 50%, and they're all sub-Medicare. And, that's not viable. I do own one imaging center, and that is affordable MRI in Houston, Texas, where we do a $250 non-contrast MRI on a 1.5 Tesla Philips magnet. And you have a, board certified and fellowship trained radiologist reading the exams. I know what it takes to be, it's not, believe me, it's a little bit of mailbox money, but it's not a big money maker. We do it so that we understand the pain points of the imaging centers. And we know what it takes to be viable. And so we let our imaging centers set their own pricing. This is free market medicine at its best. And then we either make our money off of the interpretation, or we do a 20% markup to cover our concierge service and all of the extras that we add to the experience. And, in the old days, our tagline was the same high quality medical imaging at a fraction of the price. And now it's easy, affordable medical imaging. Really, with the app, if you're somebody who can text, we can take care of you so much more easily than, playing phone tag or email tag. And, those things can drag out a scheduling experience over a couple of days rather than, some of our records, which are 15 to 20 minutes to get the whole thing done. This is looking a little less optimistic than this slide. That we don't know when the pandemic is going to end, but, and I think, we have to be ready. One of the things that was interesting with the school district is they looked at going with a direct contract to one or the other of some of the imaging centers in their area. But one of the things we said is, there are a lot of mergers and acquisitions in this space, and, things happen where imaging centers shut, a lot of them go under. So, the fact that we had multiple centers in the geographic area is attractive, and it's been really helpful during COVID because a center gets an ultrasound tech who gets exposed or sick and has to quarantine. So their ultrasound is shut down, or they're only imaging 3 days because they're at 70% capacity. So there are a lot of things that has made our network, I think, really shine during this COVID crisis. Once again, I think both individuals and employers have to insert themselves into the healthcare equation. We're simply one small thing. It's a pretty easy thing, I think, if you have radiologists who have vetted these centers. It's a lot easier to shop for healthcare. If I just were somebody who didn't know much about imaging, I think I could be misled. I know the red flags on a imaging center's website, but most of our patients don't. And so, we're always happy to, if somebody gets a better price, we say, where did you get it? Let us look. Let us take a look and, make sure you're getting the same quality. So, I do think that finding resources that are specialists, that know how to shop for care is a really good way to do it, because consumers, do have to be cautious. In the old days, I didn't believe there were bad doctors. They're bad doctors out there. And then there are also just these groups. The private equity has changed medicine. It's now about profitability. And for those guys, not only does the doctor have to make enough money, but they have to feed the PE groups. So, there are a lot of things to watch for in being a healthcare consumer. And I think people will become more and more savvy, but I also think that it's going to take us some time. And I really appreciate getting to tell my story today. And are there any questions?
Okay, that was very nice. And as you can see, things are evolving pretty quickly. So that's great to see. Couple quick questions I've got, and then for everybody else, if you'll use the raise hand icon or text, or I should say chat, and I'll be able to kind of signal the doctor on that. But what I was going to ask you, because of what you've been doing, especially like in Houston, where you've had all this time to really come to bear, are you seeing any of these traditional places start to bring their prices down in response to what you're doing?
Oh, absolutely. Our $250 center and that's just because we don't have, we have radiologists who own it primarily. And so, we don't have extra middlemen to feed. And so we do very, that's still the lowest price, 1.5 Tesla MRI in Houston. But yes, definitely there's much more competition in our market at this point in time than there was 9 years ago.
Did they have to kind of come down to your prices, or they just lowered theirs marginally?
I think they lowered theirs marginally, and you have to do that based on what your,
Or their overhead is.
You don't want to work harder for less.
Right, exactly. Now, as a consequence of the way things have moved forward for the centers that you work with, have they therefore turned around and tried to raise their prices to you? Now they see that there's all this competition. It's a chance for them to not give it away so cheaply, let's say.
No, because we bring, some of our better clients, we're their best customer. And so, that we want to be everybody's best customer. And so
always pays when you are.
When we're your best referring physician, you take good care of us.
Always, exactly. Charles, I see you've got your hand up.
Yes, indeed, Jeff. And if you're ready to make me a co-presenter, I could share a little example of how our cash appointments app can find one of Cristin's green imaging centers.
Let's take a look. So if we go to, and before we even jump there, because I'll just start it off by showing like the little intro slide of the thing. And so when and there's a process to get this, so it's nothing you're going to want to just run on the internet or try to get this thing. You'll see why as we break you through it. But this is what comes up. This is your complete control panel and how you'll be able to find anything and everything through here. And this is when she was describing how there's a little difference because inside here you never leave this environment. So, but
we're not
Charles,
seeing your slide, Jeff.
Oh, you know what? Hold on a second here. I got to take back control of the screen. My error. Okay, here we go. Now you should be able to. So
yep.
This is what it'll appear when you open it up. This is what you'll see on your phone. But then let's say Charles actually go ahead and try to find an MRI with this organization and see what that looks like. So hold on a second here, and there you go.
Okay, make me co-host.
Yep, there you are.
All right, start broadcast.
There we go.
So let's say my primary care physician said, go get an MRI without contrast. And your doctor loaded up those.
Back up 1 sec. What did you just click on? I didn't see what you did. Tell everybody what you're doing.
Sure. So on the left side, you'll see a panel called Tasks. And that's where my primary care physician loaded instructions to go get an MRI. So it's not there right now, but you can imagine under labs or recommended specialty, the doctor said needs an MRI. So now on your trusty app, you're in control, you know what your instructions are, and you go to the appointments right there. And you're going to go down to the bottom of the screen and press create appointment, and it asks you what you want to do. On that second option, diagnostics, press that and search by service and scroll down to MRI without contrast, and then click search.
And one thing about the search, it's matching up to where your zip code is, but I could open it up and say, hey, I want to find the best imaging place in the whole United States. So you control the search too, although obviously typically you're going to want to get it close to yourself. But go ahead.
Exactly. So I put it around Washington, D.C., where I've been a lobbyist for a couple of decades. And there I see the closest one to me is in Chevy Chase. And you see the price there is a range. As Dr. Dickerson said, with radiology, you don't want to promise a price up front because Cristin reminded us why. You have to have a real consult with the radiologist to figure out what you really need, right?
Correct.
So she has a range there of about $300 to $1,440, and there's the phone number if you want to call, and she can put something about green imaging. You want to confirm your selection, and then you're going to maybe put the details, the reason for your appointment. Maybe you have a file from your doctor you want to upload, and then click proceed, and then they will get back to you to schedule that appointment time. And
one thing, let me interject one thing to mention. In that, if you go back one more, keep going back, no, the other direction towards the app itself. See where it says medical chart? What'll have happened ideally is that when the doctor tells you to get the MRI, the stuff related to what's to be done at Green Imaging will be contained within that. So that I will expedite that. So they're going to tell them that you're getting specifically this MRI without contrast number, blah, blah, blah. So it all kind of automates it for you. And then after it occurs, then the information is backloaded into your medical charts. So you'll be able to have access to it as you go to a different doctor or whatever happens next.
Exactly. And once Dr. Dickerson's Green Imaging Center near you books your appointment with you and gets you the right procedure, it'll be paid for out of your wallet. And the wallet you use is your Visa card, or if you do need to get a more affordable plan. You know, Jeff and I were featured in Forbes for this top option, sharing with an HSA. And of course, health savings accounts are great to save up for retirement, out-of-pocket costs. And you can use other accounts too to pay for it. But that's your whole medical world right in one app, and that's how it would work for imaging with one of Cristin's branches. In every state except one, over 1,000 centers.
One thing real quick to add to what you were just saying, the wallet, though, is also where your employer potentially is putting funds. So if you're self-paying, you're doing your own thing, then you've got this app. But if this is an app that you now have because I work somewhere, my employer's put the health plan in, and this is the way it gets administered, and the employer's giving me money every year so I can pay for out-of-pocket stuff, it'll be in the wallet inside this app. The employer has an interface, and they put money in every employee's pocket. Now, in the typical plan we've got built in here, they're going to give you $500 if you're single and $1,000 if you're a family. And pretty much you can spend it on anything, because normally if you have a normal health plan and something goes wrong, you're making a little claim, making a copay, but it's something medically oriented. Well, in this, it's just kind of mad money. So whatever's on the app, well, I didn't get sick this year, but I didn't get my teeth cleaned. I could actually use the money in the app and spend that $500 that way and not have to specifically use it just geared to the health insurance itself. So this is much, much better. And one nice thing about this, and Cristin, I don't know if we talked about this specifically, but what I liked about it is what you've been trying to do almost in a secretive way by driving everybody prices down. This app suddenly immediately makes everybody be a gas station on the corner. Everyone's going to see your price on the first day, and it's going to take a lot less time for prices to normalize because everyone's going to be forced to compete right up front with everybody, which is the great part about this program. Because I always tell everybody, like, even as what you've done, and see what you think. You know, when Blue Cross or Medicare and they figure out what an MRI price is, and then they're all high because they all can get it. It's kind of, why are you so expensive? Because we can, type of thing. And so you're trying to come in at a nominal price to be more effective. But really, is the price you charge really the real price? Or are we going to find out after another year of everybody really competing for the first time ever that maybe your price is actually 10% cheaper after a while because that's what the market is forcing it to be? And until this app came along, there was nowhere to make that reality occur. What were your thoughts in that regard?
Well, we've been posting our prices for 9 years, and it depends on the market. I would say in Boston, where you're only 10% of the studies are being performed in outpatient imaging centers. And they have to, these doctors are typically a patient's doctor is typically going to be a doctor in a hospital system and expects, the same protocols they get in the hospital. And so the patients on the scan are twice as long. All of those factors factor into pricing. So it will help, but there are, if an imaging center has a great United Healthcare contract, they're not going to be willing to take, a lot of cash pay patients who might displace those United Healthcare patients who are going to pay 2 to 3 times as much. Sure.
Yeah. Well, but it's like a high-end restaurant and a fast food chain. I mean, in this instance, the image is the same. So it's kind of a bit of a bad analogy, but it still plays a little bit. But it'll be interesting because let's say I'm like mimic you exactly. I love what you're doing. I totally get your whole concept. I'm privately bought this building. I got a great deal. I got a couple other guys involved with me. And we decided we're going to be 20% cheaper than you all day long, no matter what. Well, sooner or later, something's got to give. Either I can't keep sustaining my business at that cheap of a rate, or others are going to have to start to come down to my pricing too after a while, which again gets us to what is the real price for this stuff. Like most everything else in America gets sorted out eventually. So it's going to be really interesting to see as this experiment continues. And what's great, and I don't know what your feelings are similar, but this COVID, as bad as it's been, is a little bit of a blessing in disguise in certain ways to accelerate this transformation. Do you think
it definitely is. Both economically and from a safety standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Outpatient imaging centers, independent imaging centers, on the whole, are significantly cheaper than hospital-based systems. But hospitals have to provide a different level of care. They have to, have it staffed 24/7.
Right.
It's an entirely different animal.
Exactly. Which is nice. Now there's a place for everyone to have their own lane, as it were, as opposed to everybody sort of being forced into one-size-fits-all mentality all the time.
Right. And the other thing is, the other factor here that's very complicating is the idea of needing new, brand new technology in healthcare. Actually, if you look at most of the countries around the world, they're operating on 30-year-old CT and MRI scanners. There's no real added diagnostic efficacy. There are a few things, maybe looking at cartilage with a 3T MRI, definitely looking at endometriosis and prostate cancer with a 3T MRI, maybe breast cancer. But even then, it's a very small diagnostic difference. There are companies that are coming out, and this is one of the really fascinating things. There are companies that are helping make the old machines perform more like the new machines using AI. And we're actually doing a beta test with one of those companies at Affordable MRI in Houston. And so it can either improve your image quality or decrease the scan time, or both. And there are issues with it. We're gonna help them through it. But certainly they have been able to make our image quality better. Whether that's a diagnostic difference, probably not. And radiologists are used to. We know that, there's not a huge difference on an older MRI or newer MRI. Now, if you're trying to get patient throughput, that's what all the 3T MRIs around the country are tuned to do, is get the patient off the table faster so you can get another patient in there. And that's reasonable if you're at full capacity. That's something you need to look at. But really, this older equipment is very much diagnostic and is workhorse. If you look at orthopedist offices, they're not putting in their own 3T MRI. They're putting in a 1.5 because they understand that. They deal with that every day.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Paul, I see that your hand is up.
Yeah, great presentation. A lot of really good information. Just wanted to, this is really more of a sidebar, but I was just simply wondering if you had given any consideration to integrating lab services, let's say when someone needs contrast, for example. I would think that could be an advantage, for your operation, to have that kind of service, integrated, maybe give you a leg up on the competition.
Well, there are quick renal function tests that a lot of our imaging centers actually have on site. But yes, we certainly, I actually am a Sedera affiliate. I can sell you a healthcare plan. I mean, there are a lot of things that it makes sense because people are coming to us and looking for information and being good consumers, that it makes sense for us to put out there. So yes, I mean, lab services are a natural extension. What we are really experts at doing, though, is medical imaging.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Very nice. One of the questions that came in is, are you in all states? And I know from the map it isn't, but what's the situation on your footprint?
We will, with it, we have a contract that's extending us to, we will be in 49 states within the next couple of months. Our malpractice carrier actually will not cover us in New York. And so we do not have current plans to go there. It would require a new policy. If we had the right opportunity, obviously we would extend our services there.
Yeah, interesting you mentioned that. I work in the insurance field for 30 plus years, and that's the one state that a lot of insurance is not sold in is New York. It's the most problematic state in the country for healthcare and for insurance, interestingly. And now with their taxes, everyone's running away anyway. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that state.
And
There's
with
an,
COVID, so,
what's that?
and with COVID, we don't exactly.
Yeah. It's
Although
just,
Houston can't, here in Houston, we can't say anything.
no, but even still, I mean, New York's a much different scenario that way too, in its own certain way. Here's another question that was in from the sidebar area. Now that AHA lost their legal challenge on price transparency, I hope you guys are going to extract and post their prices versus yours. Do you know about that particularly?
Yes, what was the last part of the question?
This is, are you going to start to extract and post their prices versus yours?
You know, I do that all the time on LinkedIn. I mean, I do that with claims data. You know, we found with the school district, one of the really dirty stories in healthcare is that when hospitals and insurance companies sit down to negotiate quote unquote deeper discounts, so that the insurance company doesn't really feel that discount, there are changes in the claims edits that let some studies go through at higher prices. And so what we found when we ran, you know, those 10,000 lives for 18 months through our claims analysis, we found 600 exams for MRIs and CTs that didn't have appropriate CPT codes. That's way too many to be inpatients. So you could say a few of those may have been inpatients, which this carrier will allow inpatient exams not to be coded with CPT codes. But there were 606, I think, claims, and many were paid out in the $20,000 to $40,000 price range. And so my feeling is that that kind of stuff will just continue to happen. I'm not optimistic that this is going to change. You know, the other thing is when you go into a hospital for an exam, you know, this happens to me with imaging centers. You know, we send somebody in for a mammogram and they do a breast MRI and an ultrasound. You know, we have to say, no, this patient is going to get this exam. If she needs additional studies, we are going to schedule those. We're going to make sure it's appropriate and we're going to schedule those. But there's this run up that happens in hospitals. And so I'm glad that transparency is going to happen. But, you know, the other thing that happens with imaging, and people don't realize this, they run a claims analysis and they just take a CPT code and they average it. You know, they find out the average. Well, some of those are facility fees and some of those are professional fees. And if you average those, you're bringing down, that's a wrong answer. That is you know, that is not the cost of care. Those get added together and then averaged. And then you've got to put in the contrast and the radio tracers and the supplies and the venipuncture and the creatinine that was obtained before. And so hospitals unbundle. And it's just, I think it's a great idea, price transparency. But for a consumer to get on there and really understand what they're looking at and that to be what's really done once the patient gets there, I think they play too many dirty tricks.
Quick question for you, because we got another hand up, but you know how, and this is kind of interesting new news to me that you made that comment that they can go in for one thing and then they kind of run up and run all these other tests. How do they suddenly have permission and the ability to do that when the doctor only ordered a specific thing?
You know, it depends. Like with radiology, if we actually as radiologists have permission, if it's an emergency, certainly we have permission to add on additional imaging. A lot of times the orders for mammograms are written with ultrasound and MRI if needed, because the doctor wouldn't want to be bothered again to go write another order.
Oh, okay.
And so a lot of times there is permission granted to do that full workup.
Okay. Charles, I see you've got your hand up.
I do. Dr. Dickerson, maybe get a little more political here. In the grand scheme of things, as COVID makes people a bit suspicious about some of the controlling nature of the medical leaders and institutions, how important is it for patients to take up this opportunity to become cash shopping patients?
I think for both patients and employers, the time is now. I think if we go into, we're already in an economic crisis. If we go into next year with 20% increases in insurance, you know, green imaging can be bolted onto an employer plan within 3 days. A patient can come find us every day, you know, within an hour or so they can get scheduled. These things can happen right now in advance of next year. If we get into next year and, you know, more than 50% of people are on employer funded healthcare plans. And then if you start including the government, you know, more than half of the US government's budget really goes to healthcare because the VA and all the different, you know, entities that that have healthcare plans that are within our government. So if you start looking at those going up, that healthcare cost that's already astronomical, going up another 20% next year, that is an economic disaster. I think it's our responsibility to get out there this year and change things.
Very nice. Janice, I see you've got your hand up. You have to unmute yourself there.
Okay.
There you are.
Thank you. This has been awesome. A really good friend of mine is a radiologist here in Austin. So, and his mother is in Houston. So, you know, we're sort of simpatico here. How do you get to 49 states though? Like, what does that mean? Because, you know, one would think that you have, you know, practices in all 49 states. Obviously you don't. Are you just able to read these scans that come in from 49 states? Like, how does that work?
Well, where we have enough lives, employer lives, you know, where we have 10,000 lives, we go in and get our licenses in that state. And actually COVID has made that really easy. A lot of the agencies have relaxed those responsibility, you know, not responsibility, but the process. They've made it easier to go in. And I have radiologists, I have a few radiologists who have licenses in a lot of states because they've worked for some of the PE groups in the past, and, you know, where they're, you know, licensed in almost every state. Where we don't, we really try to find radiologist-owned centers or, you know, centers that are like-minded. There are a lot, you'd be surprised at how many imaging centers across the country are emerging to have, you know, posted cash pay prices. And they're trying to do the same kind of thing we are, but we expand their footprint. You know, we'll get them that same cash price, but, you know, we give them exposure to a lot more patients. And so, but you know, my background is in multi-specialty medical care. And so my favorite thing is where I'm working with the near site clinic or the DPC doctor or whatever, and they're sending their referrals across and I'm saying, oh, you know, you don't really need contrast for this chest CT. Let's 20-year-old, let's not do that. You know, where we work together, that's really getting back to direct care. And, you know, multi-specialty group care in this country is still a very affordable and viable option. Most multi-specialty groups are not getting paid by the insurance companies at more than Medicare. And, you know, they provide great care, having their, you know, radiologists in there and they go look at the images with them. That's getting back to better healthcare. And so that's what I've spent my career doing. And I love this model. So, you know, we still read 85% of the exams, and that's predominantly because we have huge patient bases in Florida and Texas. But, you know, we will continue to expand that model where we have the lives.
Very good.
So the short question is, we actually contract with the imaging center to buy the scan. And so it's a simple contract. We don't own them. There's not a green imaging sign out front. We just buy the scan from that center.
Okay.
Very good. I'm going to actually tap one of our guests out there. Jane, are you available? Jane Dolan?
Hey, Jeff, I'm here.
Okay, I can hardly hear you. I need to be a little louder, possibly.
All right, I'll try. Is that
Okay,
better?
very good. Yeah, this is good. Now, Jane's been many years with the Marion Institute and the Bioregulatory Medicine Institute, which opened a clinic, a European-styled clinic in Rhode Island. So, but you can kind of comment a little bit on the value of, you know, what's happening and how you guys are merging on a broad array of, you know, because imaging is a part of the whole spectrum of what's to happen to patients. What are you seeing happen in context of what she was describing here tonight?
Yeah, so we see a lot of our patients wanting to have different types of imaging, such as thermography. Have you thought of going in that direction at all?
Thermography is not, with breast imaging, certainly the data is old. When I was at the World Healthcare Congress, and there was a company that was doing that. And when I looked at, the data that was supporting it, some of these guys who they were using as resources were my professors at MD Anderson 20 something years ago, and many of them are not alive anymore. So they were comparing their technology to older mammography data. That doesn't mean that there's not emerging use of thermography. Certainly, as there is good clinical data that supports that it's better than 3D mammography, which it's going to be a long time before I think that happens. We will go there. I think the thing, MRI is not, it's not you're not using radiation. And there's some really great single sequence MRI options coming out for breast imaging that'll be really quick and much more affordable than a breast MRI, that I think will be much more sensitive and specific than thermography. That doesn't mean that, we don't run high-risk people maybe through thermography a couple of extra times a year to pick up if something is, fulminating, or, during COVID, maybe walking through a thermography booth or whatever, maybe that's safer. That we're completely open-minded to new technologies, and I completely understand women's desire not to have radiation every year. But right now, the most cost-effective, best way to get a mammogram, I didn't really believe in 3D mammography in the beginning. I think it's an expense that isn't necessary, because the percentage of extra cancers you pick up is very small. Maybe something to 1 or 2 patients out of those few thousand. But what I'm seeing is the callbacks are so much fewer. That's an extra expense. When we call somebody back for a diagnostic mammogram, it's not only an expense of the exam, it's an expense of time from work. So I am becoming a believer in 3D mammography. It's taken me a long time, but I think really especially in the employer space, where there's time off work involved with getting a mammogram, that it's an emerging technology. It should be the standard of care. If price is a question, in a community clinic where we just need to get these people screened, that's a different story. So we look at all types of technology. And actually I have an affiliation with somebody who has an infrared camera company. And so we talk a whole lot about emerging technologies for that.
And boy, sorry, Jane, I didn't mean to talk over you, but that should be great. I mean, I got to imagine the more we get into this whole cash world, the more innovation will occur than we've ever seen before, which is exciting. I want to definitely thank you for coming today. Sadly, we've run out of time here. If you had some interest in this app that we were describing, where Cristin's organization is definitely well represented, this is the page you want to go to, wowadvocates.com, and you can click on the sign me up, which actually just brings you information about it. Great little video and stuff. And I'm excited that you're going to be a part of this. I think this is going to really, like you said, revolutionize what's going on out there. And unless we take some bold action, we're going to get subsumed by this one-size-fits-all mentality that the government and everybody else is trying to foist off onto us.
Well, thanks for having me today. This has been great.
Super. Thanks again for being here.